All right, so we're going to go through another video of GPS data. You might be wondering why I'm making these, just to share some insights into what I'm capturing if coaches don't have GPS, and help out sport coaches get a little bit more in-depth look into what athletes are required of on the field and what they're doing on the field in terms of sprints and volume and a couple other metrics along with that. And I'm also going to today compare football and soccer. So there'll be some different sports to look at and the demands of those sports. But also recording this so I can look back on this and see data over time and differences between sports and athletes and tracking different athletes over an extended period of time. So today, the first part we're going to look at is a football game, one of the district football games that just happened between Pocatello High and Preston. We've got two athletes that were GPSed up on this today. We're supposed to have three, but unfortunately they weren't able to get the unit in time. But what you'll see here is we have a tight end and a wide receiver. Okay. Now I've got the numbers pulled up against each other. The tight end's on the left-hand side and the wide receiver is on the right-hand side. And something to keep a note for this game is it was an absolute blowout. So these players played mainly a half and then just a little bit in the third quarter and fourth quarter, but didn't get their typical volume that they would in terms of how much time they were on the field. But still some useful insights on that first half. So what you'll see is the tight end actually covered more sprint distance than the wide receiver. So a total of 2.08 miles versus 1.63. But what you see on the high-speed running yards, anything over 12.6 miles per hour, I believe, wide receiver has 294, tight end has 181. So this can start to get you to think down the road of, tight ends routes, the type of routes they're going to be doing, where they're going to be lined up on the field. They're going to be not being able to get up to top speed as often, rather moving through at a slower speed, or what we call game speed, and making more cuts and movements throughout, which this data will back up over time. Now, high intensity distance is crazily within 10 yards of each other. So what that means is the wide receiver ran more high speed running yards, so anything over a certain mile per hour. But the high speed or the high intensity distance actually takes into account deceleration and acceleration yards. So what you'll see is the tight end actually made up quite a bit, almost 100 yards, because they were accelerating and decelerating more often. And those are called high intensity distance yards because that takes more toll on the body, right? So the tight end, despite running less total high speed running, they actually had a higher total when it came to intensity of the running, because of the way that they were running routes and the way they had to accelerate and decelerate often. And that carries over down into the sprint distance. So you'll see the wide receiver has 221 yards of total sprint distance in terms of how many yards they got over that certain mile per hour. And then the tight end only has 78. Okay. Now the sprint distance is a higher entry. So the entry is above, I believe, 15.6 miles per hour. So that's the difference between the high-speed running versus the sprint distance. Okay, just for a little breakdown is high-speed running is over 12.6, I believe, and the sprint distance for men typically is off of 15 or higher mile per hour, so a true sprint. So you'll see that the wide receiver obviously sprinted a lot more, which we kind of came to the conclusion why there was such a difference between the high-speed running and the high-intensity distance. And then calories burned, not sure how accurate this truly is, but you'll see here a little calorie measurement, not too worried about that. Now, speeds. Tight end, 19.69. That's actually not bad at all for an in-game padded up speed for a tight end. That's pretty fast. I believe this athlete without pads is high 20s, getting close to 21 miles per hour. So very efficient with pads on there. Now, this is a nutty number for our wide receiver, 21.39 miles per hour. If you watch the NFL, you'll see that Tyreek's hitting 22, and he's one of the fastest guys in the NFL. So This wide receiver is absolutely smoking on the field in pads and is hitting high top speeds. Number of sprints for tight end was only 2. So again, entry over 15 miles an hour. So he didn't really have a ton of opportunities to open it up in full sprint. Wide receiver had 7 opportunities to sprint. Why this is important is you can also look at volume of the athletes and what type of demand they're having in training, so that you can make sure your practices make sense on Monday, Tuesday, or any type of work you're going to be doing with athletes, whether conditioning or speed work. Just giving you some insights into what the demands might look like or be different between the athletes. So like we talked about, that having a higher intensity distance yard for the tight end, you'll see here they have a lot more accelerations and then they have more decelerations. So total, they were accelerating and decelerating more often. The wide receiver was less, 24 and 16, versus the tight end, 33 and 19. Now, intensity, I want to show you guys this because I want to argue the point that really I think football should start moving towards a sprint-based program versus a conditioning-based program. You'll see distance covered per minute, total 35 yards and 27 yards. So within a whole minute, they're covering that amount of yards, and that doesn't mean that they're running fast, whatever. That can be walking, jogging, whatnot. So total of 35 and 27 yards, high speed running per minute. So that over 12 miles an hour, 3 yards and 2 yards. High intensity distance per minute, 4 and 4. So they balanced out on that. And then the sprint distance per minute, 1 yard and 2 yards. So over 15 miles an hour, 1 yard and 2 yards. So this really again, this just totally proves the point. I got to gather more data to kind of put together a whole, whole case study on what this is going to look like and how it's going to be able to convince sport coaches, especially particularly football coaches right now, that you're training, you do not need conditioning per se. What you need is athletes that are very fast, number one, for multitude of reasons, make plays, but also speed reserve. The faster your athlete is, the lower intensity it's going to be for them to run, 13, 14, 15, 16 miles per hour. So they will seem relatively in better shape if they can hit higher speeds. And also, this is in reality how much yardage they're covering. Like, it's not a lot, okay? Now, what that means is these athletes need to be focused on a sprint-based training program. They need to be doing actual speed work. They don't need to be conditioning, and they need to be training in a way that's going to develop top speed and acceleration capabilities over time, and also just repeatability of high-effort sprints. Period. Okay, they're not covering that much distance per minute. All right. So now I'm going to jump over. Wanted to briefly go over my soccer girls as well. So this is 2 soccer girls. One is a defender. One is an attacker. This is going to be the district game against Preston. Now, what you'll notice with soccer players is it's definitely different than football, right? So let's see here real quick. So on the left-hand side, the blue column, we have the defender. And on the right-hand side, we have the attacker. So total volume, attacker throughout the game got 3.5, defender got 4.05. So that was actually surprising to me. The defender got more total mileage than the attacker. Just keep that in mind. They won this game too pretty handily, so it wasn't like they were pushing the ball on this side the whole time. High speed running, pretty much identical down to 3 yards. Isn't that insane in terms of over 12 miles an hour? Pretty much the same. High intensity distance, though, you'll see here the attacker got a lot more total volume when it came to adding in those accelerations and deceleration distances. They got 110 yards more than the defender. So that just shows the attacker is asked to start and stop more on a dime. Defender, not quite as much, although still fairly high. Sprint distance, 79 yards versus 40 yards. Now, these athletes are both fast. So typically with a female athlete, you have the GPS units set a little bit lower on sprint entry speed. Now, these were still set at 15. What I have it for my males, just because didn't have time to switch that out. So these aren't quite as relative, but you will see these soccer girls, they got 40 and 79 yards over that 15 miles an hour, which is really fast for them because that's pretty close to their max speed. You'll see speed here. Attacker hit 17.6, defender hit 16.83. Something to keep in mind is this is high. So we train both these athletes. This attacker hit pretty much a PR or at relatively maximum speed for that with that 17.6. This defender actually didn't have the opportunity to really open it up as much, even though she has a lower total speed in game or highest top speed. She's my faster athlete in training and capable of higher speeds. So the faster athlete, the defender, was actually not able to display the speed as much, which could argue to the point that this player may be better off in a position where they are able to utilize that speed more, whether it be a midfielder or attacker, because this athlete's capable of a lot higher speed. You see the attacker had 4 sprints over that 15. Again, this would be higher if those entry speeds were lower. And then 2. So attacker sprinting more than the defender. But what you'll see here is the defender has more accelerations and decelerations, which is really interesting, right? So the defender has more accelerations and decelerations total, but they're definitely over shorter distances because what you'll notice is her high intensity distance is lower. So again, this is like a class, and I know this is a lot, but high intensity distance is lower, 790. But she has more acceleration and decelerations. That just means that these happen probably in a shorter span or very quickly. And she was able to stop on a dime. Are lower for the attacker, 23 and 21. But these accelerations and decelerations with the nature of the game and chasing the ball and then slowing down after stolen and whatnot, those probably covered more distance for each start and stop. This could also potentially argue that this athlete is just more efficient at stopping, and this athlete is not quite as efficient at stopping. Maybe needs some more work on their ability to decelerate and accelerate, which, again, this athlete is the faster athlete. So something to keep in mind is they got higher total volume, but they had to cover less distance with it, which could be considered efficient. Now, intensity. So distance per minute total, just covered, walking, jogging. Again, this isn't just running. It's actually a majority of not running. So you'll see here, defender 89, attacker 77 yards. Obviously, a lot higher demand than football in terms of just total yardage covered. But keep in mind, let's look down here at the sprint. So the high-speed running, 3 and 3. So they're only running over 12 miles an hour for 3 yards per minute. And the high intensity distance per minute is actually pretty high, right? Because they have a ton of accelerating and decelerating. So that's also a really interesting point for soccer athletes. Now, sprint distance per minute, this, again, we're going to not really take this one that serious because the number was so high on the entry speed because it's set up for my men. But what I really am nerding out about right here is this part that we just talked about is, okay, they're covering a bunch of distance, but it's not a lot of high-speed running. So this is where you could argue, okay, that sprint, this is what changes the game, is the ability to move quickly and accelerate and decelerate quickly. Like, that's going to be what makes the big plays in soccer. And that distance is not super long, right? So these athletes need to be still sprint-based training, right? Getting really good at high-speed running. And also with these guys, you do need to work in those tempo runs, right? Because they're covering 89 and 77 yards in a minute. But again, a lot of that is walking and jogging. So argument would be implementing a sprint-based training program where you sprint really, really hard, max speed, for short distances based on this, very short distances, maybe, 10 to 50 yards. And then you walk or you jog but mostly I would probably say you sprint as fast as you can, you walk for 3 minutes and then complete again, because then you would get your totals. So sprint, walk. That's going to be more efficient for these soccer players than just jogging around all the time, because if you're just jogging, you're going to be getting way more distance per minute than you need, right? That makes sense in the game. And number 2, you're not going to be touching this high-speed running, which is what they need to be able to do. And then you'd be efficient at it and be able to repeat that time and time again. Now, last point, a lot of distance covered per minute with high intensity distance. What does that mean? That means they're accelerating and decelerating a lot. Okay. This is why soccer athletes, particularly females, need a lot of work on change of direction, planning, and being able to stop and start, which also correlates with strength, right? Um, and that's why you probably see ACL injuries. Like that's the most prevalent ACL injury, or in women's soccer is the ACL injury, and it's the most prevalent in any sport. And that is why, is because they have the demands of starting and stopping under the potential of fatigue uh, very often throughout the game, much more so than football, from what we've been tracking. So uh, these girls are exposed to higher distance per minute, more intense starting and stopping more frequently. So it just, again, backs up the point of these athletes need to be able to sprint, they need to be able to decelerate, and they need to be strong and capable through ranges of motion, because if they have not practiced their change of direction, if they are not strong and they are not training and lifting weights and jumping and doing plyometrics, your athlete's going to have a very high risk of tearing their ACL just due to the nature of the sport. So, a lot to unpack. Appreciate you guys taking the time to watch, and excited to keep gathering data over time and putting this all together. Thanks, guys.